Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome, and the first show of 2011 for Access to Democracy. I'm your hoarse host with laryngitis. I don't know why. I'm coming back from Mexico with laryngitis. Over the break is not what you're supposed to do, so bear with me. We have three terrific guests today, and before we start with our guests from the district court system, I just want to say congratulations to the troops here at Eagan TV, who Jeff, Dave, Dan, and Fred, the permanent troops who put together two wonderful programs last year, among many other programs that won national recognition from NATOA and were nominated for 2 Emmys. And I know they do that with the help and guidance of Tom Garrison, and I think they really, really are to be congratulated, and that Eagan and the people of Eagan are really lucky to have such professionals working for them. Now today, we have 3 guests, one longtime favorite and 2 new guests, Judge Ed Lynch, who is the Chief Judge of the First District Court, Judge Dave Knutson, who's been with us many times and is a member of that court, and Carolyn Wren, who is the administrator of the First District Court and the person that really has the toughest job.
It's true.
And I think everybody will acknowledge that. So why don't we go to Judge Lynch first, and I know you have a court that spreads sort of over 7 counties, wide-ranging, several hundred employees, and how many judges?
Right now we have 36 judges, Alan, and under the Minnesota weighted caseload, we have a need for about 39 judges right now. So we've chronically been under-judged because of it's a growing area. The First Judicial District, as you say, it covers 7 counties. It's in the south metro area. Includes Scott County, which is a fast-growing county, and Dakota County, which has been a fast-growing county in the past.
And your jurisdiction is both civil and criminal. We'll get into that a little bit more, but that covers everything.
Right. We can do anything from a conciliation court case to a murder case.
My son just called me from Jacksonville this morning, and he said, "Dad, I sat on a jury this week." And it was a drive-by shooting case, and the people in the car did not quite see the individual who did the shooting, but they saw that he had dreadlocks, and that was it. The defendant had dreadlocks, and my son, arguing with other members of the jury, says, "That's not enough to convict him. There's a reasonable doubt thing. When my father was practicing law, I used to hear him talk about it all the time." Well, sure enough, they went back and got a reading on reasonable doubt. They argued for 2 days and acquitted. Afterwards, the prosecutor said, "I never would have brought this case, but they made me bring it." So
Interesting.
Justice was done in Jacksonville.
Well, I'm sure that your son found that it was a rewarding experience. I mean, that's what we
He
hear
thought
from
it was
jurors.
wonderful. He said it's the first time he's ever been on jury duty. And for people who have not done jury duty, I think that they find uniformly, whether it's civil or criminal, that it really is a rewarding experience. Now, you basically, Carolyn, you handle the jurors.
We do.
And how does that system work?
It works pretty well. We're in charge of, we summon the jurors for Dakota County, and we walk them through orientation, and then once they get through orientation and get onto a case, then afterwards, then we're in charge of making sure that we pay them. It works pretty well. I think most jurors, although at times feel that it might be an inconvenience to do it, I think once they're done with their term, find that it's a very rewarding experience and that they've learned a lot about our system.
And how many jury trials might we have in a year?
Oh, in a year?
Dakota County?
Boy, in a month, I think every month we probably have anywhere from 10 to 20 every month.
Now, one of the things that people used to complain about a lot was having to sit around waiting to be called. How does that work?
We've tried to change that. We did that a couple of years ago. We actually have the jurors call in, and as soon as we know that the trials are ready to go, we have them call in, and we give them, they have group numbers, we tell them to report at a certain time so that we eliminate, they're not coming to court, to the courthouse on a Monday and having to wait until Thursday to go to trial. So we try to give them, although that still is a little bit inconvenient because sometimes we tell them in the morning that they have to come in by 1:30, so they may have a shorter period of time, but at least they can wait at home or at work.
And of course, sometimes cases settle, sometimes cases
That's
settle
correct.
during open arguments, opening arguments, so that
And that's one of the
there's no way
reasons-
to guarantee that.
That's one of the reasons why we've changed that process to be a little more convenient to our jurors.
Judge Lynch, how are the courts operating in today's budgetary crisis? And I mean, we're in a political time unlike any political time I remember, maybe back to the civil rights movement, when people are so polarized. And in terms of states and budgets, everybody's broke. As David Letterman says every night, I'm broke, are you broke? Everybody broke? Well, the courts are broke too, but the courts have a function that has to go on. It's so important to our democratic system. So how are you handling it, and where can we improve? What can we do?
Well, first of all, if the courts were as broke as David Letterman, we might not be in this bad a shape. But as you know, it's the recession, depression, however you want to term it, over the last 4 or 5 years that have really affected all entities funded by the state or county. The court itself, the judicial branch, is completely funded by the state now. We get our money from the general fund appropriate by the legislature. We're in the process now of presenting our budget to the legislative committees that deal with our judicial branch budget. The only thing that's not funded by the state is the facility. So every county has to establish a courthouse and provide that to the courts for conducting the business. In order to address some of the cuts that we've experienced in the last sessions, we have really been trying to leverage technology much more than we have in the past. We've been able to do that. We're centralizing things, regionalizing things. We're trying to look at what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and see whether we should continue doing it the same way or make some improvements, do things a little bit differently. We have, for instance, centralized the payable process, so when people get a ticket and they can call in, they can go on the internet to pay their ticket, and what used to be done in 87 different counties is now being centralized in one area so that we can do it with reduced staff. We have more payment options. We have greater accountability, and we've hopefully are going to be increasing the collections as a result of that type of technology. But we have been working short-staffed. I think our staff is, I think the beginnings of a morale issue because we have been expecting so much of them. Some of this technology involves change, and as you know, change is difficult. And so the adjustment to change, and as soon as they get adjusted to one new process, then there's another process that's being initiated and implemented. So that has caused some stress. The judges in Minnesota, there was a legislative auditor report about 7 or 8 years ago, I believe now, and found that the judges in Minnesota have caseloads about 50% higher than judges in comparable states. And that means not only are the judges busy, but Carroll's staff is much busier than you would probably see in a lot of other states.
And we'll talk also about public defenders and legal aid, which I know is overwhelmed.
Right.
Now, Dave, you were in the legislature. Honorable Dave, sorry.
That's correct. That's correct.
So you are familiar with both sides of this picture, the legislature appropriating the monies for the courts saying how much they need, the legislature then saying, well, we can't do that. We can't give you that much. Where does that leave us? How does that work?
Well, we as the court certainly want to respect the separation of powers, and we're not going to tell the legislature what they have to do. We're going to tell them what our needs are and how we are trying to meet our constitutional obligations and the statutory mandates that they impose upon us. And thankfully and fortunately, the judicial branch has always been treated relatively fairly, and on a bipartisan basis. There's been a great deal of support for the judicial branch. I had the opportunity to go over there on Tuesday and testify in front of the Judiciary Finance, a combined committee on Tuesday, and Judge Lynch was over there to testify in front of the same committee on our budget, the judicial branch budget, on Thursday, yesterday. So the committee is very supportive, but the ultimate question is, where does the money come from? And our answer and our response is we've got distinct and separate constitutional obligations that we can't avoid. There's been cases that have been overturned because of delays, and verdicts have been stricken because of that. Because of unconstitutional delays in processing criminal cases. And that simply can't go on, and we're doing everything within our power to innovate and use technology to make sure that we meet our constitutional obligation. But we're to the point, Alan, over the last 4 years we've been cut, and we just can't afford further cuts without a substantial delay in processing the cases that we have.
And the other side of the coin, of course, is you must give emphasis to the speedy trial in criminal cases. Where does that leave people in civil cases? And sometimes the stress in civil cases is even more substantial than what, say, a defendant is going through, particularly one who's out on bail, whether it's a divorce or whether it's even a zoning matter. It affects people's lives. So there has to be a middle ground, and there has to be a meeting in terms of our responsibilities here, and recognizing that the courts are not something that we can just take for granted.
Alan, let me, first of all, the constitutional provision requires a speedy trial, not only in criminal cases, although there are special rules for criminal cases, but the Constitution talks about every person having access to justice without delay. So it's not just the criminal cases. But you make a good point. I think people, when they think of courts, are often thinking about criminal prosecution and maybe traffic tickets and so forth. But there's a whole other area where people need the help of the courts. Let me give you 3 examples that I talked about to the committee yesterday in the Senate. There's a preteen girl who is the subject of a child protection proceeding because of the beating she endured from her mother. And she wrote a letter to the court describing those beatings, and she said that the one with the extension cord hurt the most. And then to close her letter, she said wrote in capital letters, "Help me, please." There was a man, an elderly man, who lost his leg in an accident, and he had trouble getting recommended medical treatment because the 2 companies that insured him could not decide on which had the primary responsibility for payment of the expenses.